Xiaodi, what happened at TuSimple?
Well, that will be a long story. So I try to keep it short. I think back in TuSimple days, I enjoyed myself in my comfort zone as a tech guy. As you know, like every tech guy, I feel that I can build technologies, and the technologies can solve every problem. But that was clearly not the case back in TuSimple days. I feel that the company went down to the wrong path after the IPO. In fact, there were actually two companies inside one stock ticker, TSP. One is a company that is managed by me doing the technology development. The other company is really not relevant to me. They're boosting revenues, run by a group of people flown in around the time of IPO. To me, it was feeling like excessive personnel, excessive cash burn. We actually spent, I think, more than $400 million in terms of operating this massive fleet trying to boost the revenue so that, that was the Wall Street wants. But that might not be the right thing in terms of the direction of the company if I see it in a retrospective way. If you're running a revenue company, you're actually duplicating the operation. But for autonomous driving, what now I realize is to run a profit company. That is to build the product. And I think that's the difference where I failed to realize I was so naive thinking about technology can solve every problem. So I was kind of like putting myself aside as a CTO's position until it was too late. So that is really, I think, the number one part of the problem. And then the second part of the problem actually coming from the clashes with the board. I think that my CEO term failed because the unreconciled clash with the board. I mean, there were recently an article about the founder mentality versus manager mentality. I think that was a very good analogy to what I was experiencing back in TuSimple days. On one hand, as a founder, I have unlimited responsibility of the company's future. But on the other hand, you can see that the board members, they have limited responsibility. That is called the fiduciary duty to the shareholders. This is where I wanted to make a change to basically shut down the revenue company, as I mentioned before, and really focusing on the profit company, just minimizing our operating footprint, focusing on the technology development until we can make money out of this autonomous driving fleet. But I think that was not understood by the board. However, the things were exacerbated also because Motion and Hydron, my co-founder, has initiated a trucking company, and there were some unreported monetary transaction back in 2021 before I became the CEO. And during my term as a CEO, there were some false advertisements of partnering with TuSimple, which never happened in 2022. So all of this, I would say small issues are exacerbating the distrust between the board and me. And in the end, it was just really a quite turbulent time, and I was terminated without cause in the end.
Do you feel the board was not qualified to hold the position that they held, which ultimately led to the situation that we've all read about?
As a matter of fact, half of the board, like there are 4 independent board members, and the 2 of them, they had no board experience before. And the other 2, I think each of them, they held at least 6 board member on different companies.
There's a lot of distraction there. I'm not ISS, institutional shareholder. They obviously understand boards, and I'm not going to give a comment on board experience. What I am curious about, though, so you mentioned 2 companies inside of one company, a tech company, which you clearly stated that you were leaving, and then I'm just going to call the second one business company that was focused on the business. Looking back in retrospect, what if TuSimple never went public and you were to focus on continuing to run a tech company that eventually took over both sides of the company, made it one giant tech company without having to go through the pressure of a public market? Where do you think we would be today?
I think things will be much better, to be honest, because we don't really have the pressure. We don't really need to take the poison pill of courting to the Wall Street while we are spending $20 per mile to haul a freight and making $2 per mile in our revenue.
You're losing $18 a mile. It's not sustainable.
Yes, it's not sustainable. However, on the other hand, the other side of the argument would be, by doing that, we can boost the confidence for the general public, especially if money is nothing. Money is an easily obtainable object back in the 2021. So basically, the company being structured by the business side as an entity that can boost confidence from the others and raising money as at a necessary sacrifice of losing 80% or actually 90% of the operating cost.
Did you feel that the company was ready to IPO when that decision was ultimately made? And who ended up making the IPO decision?
Well, I mean, if you're asking me now, I think the company was not ready for the IPO. But I think back in 2021, I was not matured enough to make any determination whether it is or it is not. And remember that at that time, I was still thinking so naively that technology can solve every problem. And I'm pretty proud that still as of today, if I'm looking back, I felt that I'm leading the team and we have made the most amazing technology in the world back then.
From what you're describing, you've grown up.
Well, I hope so.
If you're giving an answer like that, you've either been very well coached or you're growing up. And I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you're growing up. If you did not go through, I'll just use the term situation at TuSimple, do you feel that you would be here where you are today with Bot in terms of the business and technology if you didn't have the scars from what you went through at TuSimple?
Oh, I think you know what? I feel that every year to me is like 1,000 day back in my TuSimple days, which means that I'm growing like 3 times faster. Or on the other hand, I'm getting over three times faster than I was in the past 2 years. Which, good and bad. Bad is my life quality is terrible in the past 2 years. But the good is that I felt that I've grown tremendously in a lot of aspects, including corporate governance, including legal, strategy, PR, and almost everything that needed to keep a company to survive in this very dynamic environment.
Looking back, what were some of the wrong decisions that you made that you wish that you could correct today?
I think the fundamental thing is that I am the founder of the company, so that I have to take care of the strategies of the company. I think overall, the biggest lesson that I have learned is not about anyone else. It's really about myself. I feel that now I can say that strategy is a big amplifier. It can either bring huge value to a company or huge damage to a company. But if you look at today's world, there's a lot of strategy failures happening in the world right now. And very interestingly, it's nobody's fault. Like if you look at today's Intel or Boeing or many other companies, big and small companies, I'm naming these big companies only because they're famous and that they have succeeded tremendously. So that's why their strategic failure can be actually known to the world. But big and small company, we all make strategical mistakes. But this strategical failure, even viewed as nobody's fault, they are in fact the founder's fault, especially for startups. So I think this is the biggest lesson that I've learned, and I have no excuses for the strategic failures of TuSimple. As I said many times, I was naive about technology, and I think technology is not going to save the world alone. They need to be protected. So this time I become the CEO of the company, and my primary job is to protect Bot Auto. And my secondary job as a hobby is to build more technology, contributing on the technology side.
When you look at Intel, you brought Intel, very famously, Intel missed mobile. They completely missed the boat on mobile, and we saw what happened with Qualcomm there on market share. Autonomous driving is changing. You have your PhD from Caltech in computer vision. As CEO of Bot, how do you avoid making that Intel mistake when the new technology for autonomous driving evolves and is ready and Bot's ready there to capitalize on it and not look back and be Intel?
Well, I think there are a lot of things that need to be answered. For Intel's strategical failure on missing the mobile side, as you mentioned, I think this is more about the reading the trend of the future. And I feel that the uncertainty in terms of the strategy for Bot Auto in the future is not about the future trend. And by the way, simply because that we have seen a very clear trend in the future, which is an undeniable shortage of the truck drivers, which is exacerbating every day. And that is the reason why I am so dedicated to join the autonomous trucking industry again. But I think the problem or the strategical uncertainties for Bot Auto in the future is that how can we structurize a roadmap so that we are focusing on the right thing? That is how to make money.
How do you build that roadmap?
Okay, maybe let me show you some failed examples. I mean, some other companies in the autonomous driving field, everyone is talking about autonomous driving as a technology feat. People thinking about this like, wow, look, this truck can run by itself. How cool is that? But as a company, many of us has failed, including TuSimple's past, has failed to answer the question of how to make money. Make money means making profit, not making revenue, right? And in order to gain profit, there are actually three parts. One, the driver's cost. And two, the operating cost. And three, customer acquisition cost. People are thinking about driver's cost. People are basically advertising about the driver cost reduction, but they're omitting about operating cost and customer acquisition cost. But in this round for Bot Auto, I need to strategize amongst all three, because all three adding up together, driver cost minus operating cost minus customer acquisition cost, is the product value. And how to maximize the product value and how to minimize the time while we're developing the product value until the product value is positive is really the key to success this time.
How are you going to lower those costs when you eventually enter commercialization?
So here's the thing. So many companies thinking about a strategy of, you know what, operating costs will be lowered if I have a bigger fleet. That's kind of like a no-brainer answer, right? But this is actually wrong. The right strategy, this is probably a contrarian strategy that I'm having right now in Bot Auto, is that can we lower the operating cost without premature scaling up? And the answer is yes. So we wanted to think about the operating cost as a technology problem, not as a scale problem. That is, we are going to use the iterative new autonomous driving technologies to lower the operating cost. For example, automating everything that we could, and do a lot of preemptive monitoring on the situation of the hardware and software health, and also improving our algorithms so that we have less dependencies on this infrastructure and software that are very hard to maintain. And by removing those, I think the overall operating cost can be reduced one day to the point that is lower than the driver's cost.
Are you following? This was pioneered by Lufthansa in the airline industry. Preemptive maintenance. Are you following that? Were you using sensors to preemptively get of the head of the maintenance costs? Because in the old days, if you have to go let's just use a Boeing 747, the teardown costs time. It takes a lot of time and cost that up. And when they went to preemptive maintenance, there's sensors, and then they would know, okay, part two in the right part of the fuselage, and they could fix it there. Is that a similar model that you're following, that airline model?
You know what? I have some homework to do after this. I'm gonna go read the Lufthansa story, but I can tell you my epiphany of this preemptive maintenance is really coming from my experience after the driver out. And you know what? As a matter of fact, many of the other autonomous driving companies, they have not finished any driver out, and I think they're really in the struggle of delivering their own driver out. But for us, while we were doing our driver out, the thing that I found is that, okay, first of all, there is a line of absolute safety, so that we need to make sure that all of the sensors, all of the hardware, all of the software needs to be up and running in a super healthy level well before every launch of the driver out run. And in addition to that, all of the redundancies also need to be 100% prepared before the run. And that gives the maintenance team a nightmare. It's just like if I'm a normal person, I'm just going to work every day, my biostatus, like my health level, can be, in an average, normal, healthy level. However, if you consider me as an astronaut, I'm going to Mars tomorrow, then you're doing a health check for me, you will find probably 25 yellow flags on me, like my health level is not ready to go to Mars. So the level of healthy check is very different when you're doing the normal driver in run versus a driver out run. And that is one of the biggest sink for all of the costs for driver out autonomous runs. And this, after realizing that point, I have known what the focus should be. That is to lower the operating cost by automating everything that is specifically designed for a redundant system. And today's system is not ready for that.
How do you get today's system ready for that automation future? Because automation is going across every aspect of industrial that we can imagine.
It's really a large number of small efforts. I just give you one very, very, very basic example. Like, are you sure that the sensor is clean enough before you go? And of course, there are maybe 5 different ways of checking whether the sensor is clean. One of them is to let the test operator do the check before everyone. But if you put that thing into your cost model, you will find that they're wasting 5 minutes just to check the sensors. 5 minutes is just money. So you wanted to avoid that five minutes of wasting. You do some automated algorithm to improve that, and something else like you're checking the health level of your SSD. You're also checking the health level of the cooling system, everything.
Is automation, if you want to call it, one of the core pillars of bots business?
I would say automation is a method. The goal is to lower the operating cost. And lowering the operating cost is not one of the pillars. It's the pillar, the monolithic pillar of Bot Auto. I can proudly tell you this. We are an operating company.
Okay, you said it. I'm asking. You're going to operate the fleet then?
Yes, we are.
How's that going to work?
I think more fundamentally, I would ask everyone else, if you're not operating the fleet, how's that going to work? There is no way for you to, in the most efficient way, lowering the operating cost. If you're asking your customer to lower the operating cost for increasing the product value for a product that you provide, that's not fair. You see, the problem really here is that you have to lower the operating cost by you because that's a product that you offer to your customers. And of course, by saying this, like hundreds of investors will challenge me. Oh, then Xiaodi, you're in a asset heavy business. That's poison. My response is like this. First of all, we are an operation heavy company. We want to be asset light, but asset light is an option. Asset heavy is not the end of the world. The key thing here is that you need to make a very strong thesis on how to make money. Everything else is a kind of a secondary thing.
Do you feel this model is the best way to achieve margins that you're trying to achieve? And if so, what margins are you trying to achieve?
I believe so. I believe this model is not only the best model, but the only model that can achieve the net positive for the product value.
Do you have any estimate of the margins that you're trying to achieve?
I would say the net margin once we scaled up is probably on the range of maybe 30%, including everything.
Would you have been able to get to this model if you didn't go through what you went through with TuSimple, especially with the Ghost Rider when you had the driver out? Would you have been able to get here from a model perspective?
I think the TuSimple Ghost Rider experience gave me a lot of reflections about the things that could go wrong. And for now, I'm actually building everything from anew. And in fact, a lot of things has changed. The ecosystem has changed. The hardware that are available off the shelf are also changed, and their failure rate has changed. And also the open source ecosystem of the machine learning infrastructure has also changed. So given all of these changes, I think it's probably more capital efficient for us to forget about every details, but only remembering the principle of operation first, operating cost reduction being our sole mission. And then we can just rebuild everything from scratch. I think by doing that, on one hand, we don't have any technical managerial debt. But on the other hand, it's really a fun experience to embrace that whole new world in building things.
Do you feel the market is ready for the bot business model? Because your model is different from every single one of your peers in autonomous trucking.
Yeah, I realize the difference, and that really gives me a hard time when talking to investors, especially in the Bay Area where everyone is talking about SaaS. So my model is being criticized by a lot of people, but you know what? If this is the truth that I believed, I think I need to defend it, and I don't mind of defending this because on the other hand, our model, even though it's different from everyone else, it's actually compatible with the market. I think one of the things is that maybe this is a little bit digression, but I wanted to say it anyway. The funny thing is that in Silicon Valley, I'm going to use a Lord of the Ring quote, history became legend, legend became myth. So people forget about the actual first principles. They all really follow on those derivative concepts. So SaaS is a perfect concept. On one hand, if you're talking about the market, what the market asks, the market for autonomous trucking, well, what they okay, so let's don't talk about autonomous trucking. The trucking market only asks for capacity. I mean, if you go to the trucking market, nobody is craving for autonomous driving technology. That's not the case. Everyone is asking for, hey, I have a load. I need this load to be shipped tomorrow or today. Who can help me? And that's the only ask by the market. But people are taking derivative concepts of saying like, yeah, you know what? If I have a software, someone else magically or heroically is going to reduce the operating cost for me, and maybe a third party is going to connect me with some shippers, and the fourth party is going to making sure that everything works together, and then boom, we launch our product. But I think that's is really a derivative concept, not the real thing. The real thing, a very straightforward thing, is that the market's needs for capacity, and what Bottle Auto provides is the capacity. So we are a direct correspondence to the market, but I think this very raw, direct way of connecting to the market is not being appreciated by some of the investors, at least for now.
You're listening to the market. There's a demand for the market. And looking at the market, you have the nuclear verdict issue. You have the rising insurance cost issue that's going across the entire trucking industry, not just autonomous trucking. What impact will your model have on insurance costs? Will you be able to have a lower insurance cost for your model than your competitors in the field? And if so, can you then pass on those cost savings to your bottom line to increase your margin?
Well, first of all, in terms of the cost per mile, if we're taking cost per mile as a kind of a golden rule for us, then the insurance cost is we're about the same as human trucking company right now. And of course, in the future, if we scale up, the insurance costs will probably further go down depending on our negotiating power. But the insurance cost is relatively small comparing to other parts of the cost. Remember, we're talking about $20 per mile as the beginning point, and we wanted to reduce that $20 per mile to somewhere around $2 per mile in total operating cost. And insurance costs, like if we can have a good bargain, maybe we subtract maybe 5 cents out of it, but it's really not the first priority for us.
How much in the cost per mile is the sensor suite? Because when you built, let's call it TuSimple, we'll call that round one, the sensors were very, very extremely expensive in some cases. Now, let's call bot round two. Obviously, we've seen the market do it, Mr. Market do his job, and the sensor costs have come down. What impact is sensor costs having on the per mile?
Previously, in my last life, I would argue for the most capable sensor, like who has the longest range, who offers most functionalities. But now, what I'm looking at is the reliability of the sensors. Because if you're thinking about this, if one sensor can last 1,000,000 miles, and then the per mile cost of the sensor is minimum, like say a sensor, let's just randomly say a $10,000 sensor, it's only about 1 cent per mile. I don't really care about that 1 cent per mile when it comes to CPM optimization. CPM meaning cost per mile optimization, right? So I think the sensor cost is really minimum. And right now, we also admit that the more we buy, the better price that we have. And right now, we have only 2 trucks operating right now as of today. So we don't really have that bargaining power, but we don't really care too much about the sensor cost. We know it's not going to be a major issue for the cost per mile journey.
How do you see the sensor suite changing? And then do we ever get to camera only for Class 8 autonomous trucks?
Again, I think this is another thing. If you really look from the cost per mile perspective, you realize that once in mass production, the LiDAR cost will be probably zero point 0.1 cent per truck per mile. That is really like negligible. And then it's really, I feel that the argument between LiDAR and the camera only, or LiDAR and plus camera and camera only, is really I would call it a technological ideologization. People wanted to criticize each other by oversimplifying the problem. But what is the fundamental metric that you're looking at? That is cost per mile. If you look at cost per mile, it's trivial. We don't need to argue against each other. If you think it will help, buy it, because it's less than 1 cent per mile. So my prediction, just to directly answer your question, I think in my company, at least in foreseeable future, we're always going to use LiDAR because it's so cheap.
I'm thinking about this. Let's say you and I, we take a walk and we go visit a truck dealer. And there's a traditional diesel powered truck. You look at it, I look at it. I'm thinking one thing, you're thinking another. When you look at it, how do you think about making it autonomous? What goes through your head when you're looking at it? You're looking at design, functionality, range, cost. What goes into that when you're looking at a truck and you say, I'm going to make you autonomous?
Very good exercise. So for me, number one is that do we have redundant braking, redundant steering, or the capability to upgrade the truck to make it redundant in terms of braking and steering? That's one. And then the second one is that I think the internal wiring in terms of harnessing and also the redundant power, all kinds of wiring and all kinds of like double E components, is it going to provide us a kind of a clean and safe solution so that we can make every wiring redundant? Other than that, we may thinking about how to install a sensor rack onto this vehicle chassis. Once that is done, I think is probably done. I mean, we don't really have too much of the extra requests for a truck.
Are redundant chassis common in the marketplace, or is that a bespoke product that you have to have, especially made just for bot auto?
Well, there are, in the early days, we certainly wanted to have a lot of a so-called retrofitting process because nobody, as of the main truck manufacturer today, they're building the exact model that we want for all of the redundant wiring and the additional sensor rack. So we have to retrofit early days. But one of the interesting observation that I had is that retrofitting doesn't mean low quality. Retrofitting means it's more expensive, but it doesn't really necessarily imply low quality. If we find a qualified tier one supplier for the wire harnessing, for the all of the sensors and the actuation component like steering and braking, then it actually worked. So this is my past experience. But if we're talking about the cost, then the operating cost, well, we put the cost per mile hat on and we find that the additional cost of retrofitting is again negligible. So that's why I'm still confident in early stage retrofitting, later stage when the cost can where the scale can justify the cost reduction. We're going to negotiate, of course, with an OEM to massively build a large number of trucks.
Before we get to the OEM, you have to go through various different forms of testing. You have on-road testing, track testing, simulation. How do you know when you make the decision to go from simulation, from track to on-road testing?
This is the statistical problem. First of all, we certainly employ a lot of simulation testing, and in my opinion, simulation testing is really helpful in the early day of testing. But when you're accumulating enough simulated miles or simulated testing experiences, on-road testing is definitely needed. There are several aspects of on-road testing. You can either do a so-called shadow testing, where you basically let the algorithm do everything except for actuation, or you let the vehicle just do the actuation. So both of testings are providing information to our system. On one hand, in the shadow testing, we can see the discrepancy of the behaviors of the human driver versus a computer driver. On the other hand, of course, doing the testing with a human driver behind the wheel is going to tell you the real performance of it end to end. These are all needed, and based on the testing results, we can build a statistical model on how often do we encounter a problem. Behind every accident, there will be maybe 10 close calls, and behind every 10 close calls, there may be 10 or even 100 discrepancies in terms of the algorithm internal representation. So we're really harvesting this internal discrepancies as an indicator for us to predict the rate of failure or the rate of safety critical failures. And then when we have enough confidence, we feel that, yeah, we've solved most of the problems. It is probably going to be safe for a couple million miles or even more to be driving on the road. Then we launch the vehicle.
Is that when when the statistical model lines up, is that when you make the decision to then go driver out?
Yes.
So in theory, you could become the first person ever to do driver out with two different companies, two different stacks, if I'm reading this correctly.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I don't know about the other companies' timeline, but it seems that everyone in this industry is having a tendency of delaying their promised milestone. I, on the other hand, I'm the hardcore guy. I never delayed one of my past promises in my career, which I'm pretty proud of. So hopefully, I can also be the one that launches this again before anyone else is launched it in public highway.
Is driver out one of the ultimate goals for bot? I'm not going to ask you for a timeline because I think timelines are inappropriate at this time, but is that one of the ultimate goals as you go forward and you continue to build bot?
Not at all. This is where I actually, I pivoted from a CTO to a CEO. I think driver out is more like an internal testimony to our own technology and how things are working together, and By the way, it is very important to set a very clear goal to mobilize the team. But this is by no means the end of our development. It is actually a not so important midway for our final goal. And our goal is, as always, this making the cost per mile of our truck operation to be lower than that of a human. And only by achieving that goal, we can make money. We can make every truck a money printing machine. And only after that, we believe that we're qualified for scaled operation.
When you achieve the profitability per truck before you go to scalable operation, as you said, what do you have to do from a safety perspective?
Safety is an uncompromised threshold that we always have to maintain. That is why, as I said, we are facing enormous amount of maintenance cost when we launch every driver out run. That is, in the early stage, seems very unpractical. Like, why are we doing these many checks? Like, we're spending hours before every single run in the early days of a driver out operation. You will never commercialize it. Of course, we hear it. In the early days, we will not compromise this safety standard, even though they're making the process like insanely complicated. And then the second step is that we're going to simplify this insanely complicated process step by step with our technologies.
And by simplifying, is that where we talked about earlier, the automation comes in as the technology evolves?
Yes.
Then, since you're taking, I'll use the term, a new approach, then do you have to get outside validation by an independent third party that gives you the check marks each way, or do you just go about it your own way?
Oh, definitely. We're going to talk to a lot of external parties. And in fact, we are talking to external parties, which I cannot name their name under the NDA. But yes, third party validation, we love it. And we are confident that our methodology is compatible with their safety principles. And in fact, we have already had some conversations, and I just feel like we should meet earlier, and we should have a beer together because our philosophies are so aligned with each other.
Well, that's refreshing. You're taking I'm going to call it, you're taking the Xiaodi Hou approach to building autonomous trucks. It's a different strategy. This time, you're going to start with the 2 trucks that you disclosed. Once you get past that, you meet all the certifications. You get your green check mark of health. How are you planning to scale the bot business while also keeping your attention focused on the bottom line, which is cost?
Well, I think the whole thing is that we are using the minimum number of trucks at every stage. However, our stage grows, the minimum number will increase because we will need to have more exposure so that we can fix or optimize the operational issues. That is going to be a very natural process. We're going to probably start with less than 5 trucks to 10 trucks to 30 trucks. And at some point around the 30 trucks to 100 trucks, we're going to break even, which meaning that our operating cost for autonomous fleet is going to be lower than that of a human fleet. That is my estimate, less than 100 trucks.
Is your advantage in the marketplace purely your cost structure?
I think that's the only validation that we need to go through.
And then you go through that validation. Then there's a little company out of Fremont, now Austin, Texas, called Tesla. They just put on a Disneyland event over at Warner Brothers. No talk of the Semi, but there is a lot of talk that FSD will come to the Semi. What are your thoughts, one, on Tesla's FSD approach? Then what are your thoughts, two, on FSD going on Tesla Semi?
Oh, wow. Okay, so you're talking to the right person because I've been bombarded by the very same question so many times. When I got a chance, I recommended to my wife to replace her car to a Tesla Model Y, and I was actually testing the FSD every week. Of course, the newest version of it every week. And my experience in Houston, I don't know what, is pretty bad. I mean, disengages every 10 minutes or so. And it's kind of like a trick that I will reserve for the investors. Whoever comes to visit us in our Houston facility, I took a Tesla. I pick up the investor from the airport. I start FSD. After the trip, they will have no question regarding Tesla. So, but I don't know. You know, it seems that the Bay Area, the Silicon Valley, is fantasy world where FSD is working much better in the Bay Area, which I'm not surprised because for any AI, there is always I would call it an overfitting principle. Like if you overfit something, it will certainly get better in that specific domain. But on the other hand, if you look at the FSD's business model, or Tesla's business model is to sell vehicles. They wanted to sell vehicles to everywhere in the world. So the product that they offer certainly needs to be all applicable to the entire US or the entire world. And that is giving a very different level of safety requirements for an autonomous driving system. Well, let's just be clear, FSD is a level 2 system, not the level 4 system. But the thing is that if you're trying to develop a level 2 system that has to be applicable to everywhere in the world, today's technology in the world does not allow this type of wide applicability to reach to the safety threshold that is required for a level 4 system.
Do you think he gets there?
Certainly they're not getting there, at least from my experience in driving in Houston with FSD. That's on one hand. On the other hand is that they are actually selling vehicles. However, if they become an operator themselves, they're actually competing with their own customers. This is especially true for trucking.
If you look at, I keep using the word Disneyland because it was, in my opinion, was inspired by Mr. Walt Disney and his vision for Disneyland, what Mr. Musk did. At Warner Brothers, they're going to sell you, myself, the Cybercab, and we're going to operate it. So I'm assuming, based on their historical precedents, that they are going to sell the Semi and then sell an FSD license on top of that. If they do, this is a hypothetical now. If they do, and they sell the license, does that model then come into the more traditional autonomous trucking side? Or say, okay, we're going to sell you this plus an add-on? Does that model sort of translate over because the market might be accustomed to it? And I say the market might be accustomed to it because Mr. Musk is extremely well at marketing and getting a lot of attention for things.
You're right. But I think the key distinction is that who is gonna be the faulty party if there's an accident. For every level 4 operating company like Bot Auto, if our autonomous vehicle has an accident in autonomy, it's on us. But I think right now Tesla's model is that whoever has a safety incident is on the driver. And I don't see that part changing in near future. I think that's a distinction. Basically, we're selling different products.
There's a lot of insurance questions to be asked. And you're right, you are selling different products. There's no denying that. And if you look at the historical way that FSD is rolled out on the vehicles, they'll operate, quote unquote, I'll use air quotes, anywhere. Obviously, I'm under the assumption, based on historical precedents of your competitors, that bot will operate on lanes. Is that a fair assumption that you'll start with a lane by lane model?
Yes, I mean, because I have a very clear understanding of the capability of today's AI technology. Even though, I mean, from the outsider's perspective, AI is advancing every day, tremendously, but fundamentally, there are some very deep constraints that, remains unresolved as if it were 10 years ago. So I think I have a very clear, conscious understanding of today's status of AI. And my attitude towards autonomous driving is that, yes, I know it's just basically telling everyone that we're overfitting a lane. And I'm proudly overfitting a lane because of the commercial makes sense.
So you want to be the Savile Row Taylor for the lane where you have a beautiful bespoke fit.
Yes.
Will Houston be the hub, or if you want to use the term depot, for bot operations, where the trucks they'll live in Houston, they'll go out on their lanes, and then they'll come back at the end of their journey?
We couldn't have other hubs, but Houston is definitely the headquarter and the biggest hub of bot auto operation. But we can branch out from Houston to San Antonio, to Dallas, east, west, north.
All the rest of the industry is up north in Dallas, and you're in Houston. Why Houston?
First of all, you see the other company, they are operating in Dallas, but none of them is headquartered in Dallas. But as you know, we're hardcore guys, and we headquarter ourselves in Houston. There's a reason for that, because we are an operation company. We keep telling ourselves we're not a technology company, even though we are confident that we possess the best technology in the world, but we do not treat ourselves as a tech company. We wanted to operate. We wanted to get closer to the trucks, even at an expense of getting farther away from investors. And there's maybe a Houston and Dallas discrepancy, but I would consider multiple factors. For example, Houston is a city where they also have ports, and also Houston is closer to the border, where a lot of cargoes from Laredo, they have their sorting centers in Houston. I just love I-10 corridor because of my past life. So I think starting at the middle point of the I-10 corridor really means our ambition to go through the east and the west.
From a talent standpoint, because you're going to have to hire very smart men and women to come work for bot. You have NASA there. You have the the oil and gas industry. How's the AI talent in Houston? Is there a large group of talent for you to pull from?
Oh, by the way, I'm glad that you mentioned NASA. I mean, this is also a kind of a romantic thing for me personally. I think this NASA spirit is really resonating in Palo Alto. We wanted to pioneer the unknown. And that's why Houston is, a beloved place for this. We share a lot of spirits here. But in terms of talents, first of all, yeah, most of the talents are has to immigrate to Houston. We don't really find that many local AI talents here. I have to admit. But is it a big issue or is it a small issue? I would say it is a relatively small issue for two reasons. One is that wherever we have the talents, they are all over the place in the US. They have to come to Houston for operation purposes. Operation is the king. That's one. And the second is that how many people do we need? In fact, another lesson that I've learned is that we are now living in a new era of AI where we do not want it to kind of oversaturate the talent for this company. And I'm going to build a small company, I can tell you. You will be probably surprised even after this round of fundraising, we're going to hire less than 20 people. We have about 45 or I think 48-ish, but we're going to hire less than 20. I think till the first half of next year, no more than that. We don't have the headcount. The reason is that I think in the new era of AI, it is actually possible to build a small company that is focused on the product rather than focusing on a lot of the periphery heavy lifting tasks, such as big data, deep learning training, infrastructure, and all the other stuff. We can focus on the product. Imagine that there's another company, Midjourney, very famous, right? They are famously for also having a very small team. And I think that it would not be possible for Midjourney to have a small team 5 years ago because all of the infrastructure were not ready. But now we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So we can just acquire the wheels from the outside world, and even in the open source domain, we can just acquire the wheels very openly, and that allows us to focus on the core thing, that is the product development. And also maybe another interesting observation is that for deep learning, years ago we used to have multiple neural networks existed in our system, like camera detection is one, lidar detection is another, then fusing together and then tracking prediction. Each one of them is a dedicated neural network. But now, with the advent of transformer and a lot of other new neural network architectures, I think the tendency, which we certainly embraced, is to have one gigantic neural network that solves all of the problems. Either you call it a foundation model for autonomous driving, but again, I don't want it to be considered as ideologization of technology. So I wouldn't really make a slogan out of it. But I think what we're doing is to use one gigantic neural network that has a lot of shared components, shared weights to solve most of the driving tasks in it. Of course, there are some other things that we also do outside the neural network.
If you look at WhatsApp, pre-acquisition by Facebook, now known as Meta, that was a very small team. You said you're right. Midjourney is a small team. We're starting to see a trend of small teams do really great things because of the compute power, the access to resources. And you're going to be, after you close your funding round, you'll still be under 70 employees. That's very small in the grand scale of things. Do you see small teams solving great problems continuing as a trend?
Well, I think this is, again, we're stepping into the uncharted territory. I'm actually exploring a new way of organizing a company, and that is the AI way of solving a problem and organizing the personnels. Very interestingly, I can share you one thing that sometimes candidates ask me, what is your org chart? I tell them, no, we don't have an org chart. That's quite interesting because I feel that everyone is collaborating with one another using some sorts of protocols. And previously, these protocols are maintained with a labor-intensive manner, such as the PMs are actually joining different teams together. But right now, if everyone is sharing their experience using the same kind of foundation, either using one foundation model to share their working product, their yield, or they're using the more generic way of looking at things by defining things in the less articulated way, in a less siloed way, which is more of today's AI's way. I just feel that the team boundary is getting very blurry right now.
So you're going to just be a complete flat organization with no hierarchy.
Yeah, I think it's like a manageable chaos scenario for us.
But that's going to allow you to have your hands on different aspects of the organization. You're going to, as you described earlier, clearly implement the lessons that you've learned, and you're going to go to the memory and the scar tissue to build a company that's focused on profits. When are you planning to launch commercial operations, both with the human, and then eventually when are you planning to move towards driverless operation?
Well, I think these two things are the same. And maybe I'll just go back for a second about my previous statement that having a org chart less organization is really helping us to make every algorithm engineer to be aligned on the grand vision on commercialization. Whether we have a driver or not having a driver, it should make very little difference for a deep learning engineer, because all that deep learning engineer needs to focus is on how the deep learning algorithm can contribute to our grand campaign of CPM reduction. And that can only be done if the most techie side of the company is connected with the most operational side of the company. So that's why I think we just break the wall. We don't have any operational silos, or we don't have any organizational silos. And all of that is like, either you have a human in the truck or not having a human in the truck, the protocol is the same. So I think we will remove the driver whenever we feel that the statistical numbers give the green light. And of course, this statistical approach is not going to be validated only by ourselves, but also by some third party as well. But I think for us, we will treat as if we were having a driver outrun. And on one hand, on the other hand, we're also treating us as if we were hauling this cargo for commercial purposes.
Is the algorithm team learning from the operations team and vice versa with a clear goal of, I'll use no pun intended, driving the truck forward?
Yes. And now our truck facility is like 20 minutes away from our office. So it's very convenient for everyone to ride on the truck. Sometimes, there's a configuration issue that wastes 20 minutes. The algorithm engineers should feel guilty about this 20 minutes waste, right? But previously, if your algorithm is like sitting in a beautiful office in the Silicon Valley where the testing is done somewhere in Dallas, make it. And then in that situation, I think there's a strong condescension, the algorithm engineer is like, no, you're stupid. Like you should configure it in a certain particular way so that you don't really waste that 20 minutes. But now if you're really in the facility floor, that peculiar configuration is actually because of your algorithm is not designed in a compatible way of day-to-day operation. So people would be owning more of the operation risk or operation failure to themselves.
In theory, that would allow you to scale more efficiently and more quickly.
In practice, we are. We are 1 year and 2 months old. And our truck is almost up and running for a hub-to-hub demo. This is probably 3 times faster than the world's second quickest hub-to-hub demo, which is also created by my past company, TuSimple. But we're very proud that this organization actually worked.
So I'm going to say sub 18 months. I'll give you a 4-month window there. In under 18 months, you were able to go from you and I walking and having a conversation, looking at a truck, to doing a hub-to-hub demo in less than 18 months.
In fact, that's not the case. We have our first truck by the end of June this year. And before that, we did everything in a simulated environment.
Simulation helped Excel to get to where you're going to go with your hub-to-hub demo?
Yes, especially in the early days, especially in the so-called cold start period.
You had the simulation, and how many months has it been since you've exported the simulation to put it on a truck to where you began testing? Because that's obviously a shorter time frame than this overall 14-month period.
Yes, we are, because we're all crazy. That's for sure. But in addition to that, the first 4 months of Bot Auto is that a lot of people, whether you're in a software infrastructure team or in a motion planning team or control team or even the deep learning team, everyone is focused on building the software infrastructure. And in fact, we have 8 people in 4 months building all of the necessary machine learning infrastructure for the company. Why? Because we use extensively about what is available out there. We don't reinvent the wheels. That's a kind of a lightning speed of ramping up with the infra. And after that, we build on the infrastructure, and we build a so-called data collection vehicle. So we started to collect the data from the wild, from the Houston periphery. And then we're embracing very wholeheartedly about the pre-training process that is becoming very popular because of the chat GPT. You know what GPT stands for? Generative pre-trained transformers. So we actually did a lot of pre-training techniques in a similar fashion with the GPT, and we use that to accelerate our deep learning code start. And we use transformers for our general structure for deep learning. And months of pre-training gives us a lot of advancement in terms of the deep learning capability. And based on the simulated environment, we started developing our motion planning and control algorithms. And by the end of June, our first truck arrived at the facility, and we retrofit the truck with the redundant braking, redundant steering. And I believe by the end of July this year, we started our control by wire. Basically, the computer is controlling the vehicle first in a closed loop in a private track, and later on shadow test for public highway, and now with a human driver, but automated runs on the highway near Houston.
I'm going to put my Wall Street hat on here. Would this be possible without all the breakthroughs that we've seen with the GPU architecture over the last 24 months?
Not at all. So, I think this is really an interesting moment, because after I left TuSimple, I have nothing but a bunch of strongly minded, similar minded people who also believe in autonomous driving, and we wanted to build the company again, right? And that is the moment where we are forced to start from a clean slate. And we know that this is basically impossible for us to acquire any of the TuSimple data. So why don't we just start from scratch? And so we are basically forced to find it's like Spain and Portugal, that they are forced to go to the ocean rather than go to the continent. And they found the brave new world in a similar way that we have found our brave new world by fully embracing the new era of AI. And I think a lot of things that we're using today are not available until 2022.
There's the old saying in life is about timing, and it seems that you've timed this pretty well yourself.
Yeah, I think so. I would maybe ask a little bit, or add a little bit more on that. That I think every year or every moment there's opportunity, and I think really this moment is like I'm putting myself in the mentality where I'm becoming extremely open and extremely audacious about new opportunities, and that is what we get in the end. So maybe we can call it entrepreneurship.
There's entrepreneurship, there's learnship, there's buildship, there's ship, there's profitship. We can go down the line on that. Xiaodi, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy today, clarifying TuSimple, sharing your vision for bot auto. As we look to wrap up today's conversation, what would you like our listeners and viewers to take away with them today?
There are a lot of ship, as you said, but I think the most important thing is courage. I wanted to close this with another quote from The Lord of the Ring, which is my favorite book. There is something good in this world, Mr. Frodo, that is worth fighting for.
You just have to have the courage. If you have the courage, the will, the desire, you will succeed. The future is bright. The future is autonomous. The future is bot auto. Xiaodi, thank you so much for coming on the road to autonomy today.
Thank you very much.